Yes, legitimate hockey news in August! After last night's video, I wasn't going to make a video for a little bit because, like all things, I've left the edit of my book to the last minute. But what the Toronto Maple Leafs just did is significant enough that it warrants talking about. They've promoted 2 people who already work for the team and hired 3 others. Scott Pellerin and Pellerin Robidas were the 2 promotions, while the 3 hires are named Victor Carneiro, Needham, and someone you may have heard of named Wickenheiser. So I'm going to try to make a short video, which usually means it ends up being longer, about these 5 people. Scott Pellerin is a name that older hockey fans probably recognize right away because he played in the NHL for over a decade, over 500 games. He was drafted in the 3rd round of the 1989 NHL entry draft by the New Jersey Devils, meaning he was drafted by Lou Lamoriello. And while he broke into the NHL with the New Jersey Devils, he also played for the St. Louis Blues, the Minnesota Wild, the Carolina Hurricanes, the Boston Bruins, the Dallas Stars, and the Phoenix Coyotes back when they were called that. And like Kyle Dubas, he's actually been part of the Leafs organization since 2014. Actually, I met him at the 2014 draft in Philadelphia in the only way that I know how, awkwardly. Here's a tweet I sent from the draft. I turned to the older guy behind me. So what round were you taken in? He just laughed. I was picked in 1989. It was Scott Pellerin. Look, it was my first draft. He was wearing a suit and a lanyard. I thought he was important, and it turns out he was. Anyway, that was June 2014. He actually didn't join the Leafs until November 2014 when he was named the assistant manager of player development for the team, hired to the director of player development the following June, and now he is senior director of player development. Taking over director of player development, so just regular director, I guess, is Pellerin Robidas. He was formerly assistant director of player development. Now, it says Pellerin Robidas has been with the player development department since September 2017, but I'm sure a lot of you know that Robidas' last season with the Leafs and in the NHL was 2014-15 when he played 52 games. The following season he did not play and Robidas Island was born. And there were rumblings that at some point during that season he started helping out behind the scenes. Still getting paid like a player, but the Leafs had him on LTIR and he was able to sort of establish his career after playing. And it's just interesting because Robidas Island is like synonymous with one of the darkest chapters in Leafs history, but Pellerin Robidas has actually been helping out the Leafs as they break into what could be one of the brightest chapters in their history. At very least, the brightest chapter of the salary cap era. I mean, you talk about a guy turning lemons into lemonade. Over the past few years, there have been some players that have come to the Leafs and did not have a good time. Or at very least, they came to the Leafs in not the greatest circumstances. And some of them were pretty open about how much they didn't love it, and they're not here anymore. I think of a guy like Colin Greening, who was sort of a cap dump in the Phaneuf trade, but he put his head down, worked hard, and now he's still with the organization. So is Pellerin Robidas. Then there's the new hires. Victor Carneiro was hired as an amateur scout for the Leafs in Ontario. Now, usually I wouldn't be making a video about that on account of it's not wild that the Toronto Maple Leafs have an amateur scout in Ontario. I mean, there's a lot of people who play hockey here and a lot of them end up being pretty good. And the Leafs have drafted a ton of players from the OHL in recent years, but there's a couple little tidbits. Victor Carneiro was most recently the director of player personnel for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. And according to the Leafs press release, prior to that, Carneiro was an amateur scout for the London Knights for 14 years. That's a resume, man. So with Mark Hunter gone, there's still a bit of a London Knights connection, right? Behind the scenes, I mean. Yeah, I know there's players. From a personal standpoint, I think it's super cool because Victor and I have tweeted back and forth for years. The guy knows hockey. But also, I'm like, I wonder if the video's still up, and it is. If you just type in like Kyle Dubas, Victor Carneiro on YouTube, there's videos of them having heated discussions about the Sioux Greyhounds back when they both worked for the Sioux Greyhounds. And in fact, in one video, it's about 3 minutes long, where they're getting ready for the OHL draft. In the first 5 seconds of the video, Dubas talks about, well, Victor Carneiro, Wes Clark, and myself are getting ready. Well, Dubas was obviously hired by the Leafs. He's the GM now. Wes Clark was hired by the Leafs a little while ago. You might remember his name from the John Tavares saga, and now Victor Carneiro works there too. While it's important to bring in new perspectives, I think it's just human nature to bring in people that you know, especially people that you've had success with, and Victor Carneiro is that for Kyle Dubas. But some new perspectives. Canadian Olympian, Olympic gold medalist, hockey icon Wickenheiser has been hired as the assistant director of player development for the Leafs. So for those of you keeping track, Scott Pellerin used to be the assistant director of player development. He got promoted, and then Pellerin Robidas took over. Pellerin got promoted again, Robidas got promoted, and now Wickenheiser is the assistant director of player development. So recent history suggests that's a good job to have with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And what seems to have people particularly excited about this signing is the Leafs hired a woman for hockey ops. But not so fast. I think a lot of people, and understandably so, were so excited that the Leafs hired one woman that they didn't realize that the Leafs actually signed 2. Needham, who is also in the press release, was hired as an amateur scout for the Midwestern United States. And we were talking about the length of Victor Carneiro's resume. She's got a long one too. She spent the last 9 years running an organization called Legend Hockey in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Also, according to the press release, she played hockey for Minnesota State after 6 years at Shattuck St. Mary's, which is one of the best hockey development schools going. You often hear Pierre Maguire yell and scream about it during the World Juniors, like to the point where you could swear the tournament is sponsored by Shattuck St. Mary's. So basically, the 3 new hires that the Toronto Maple Leafs made, they know their hockey. Just a little on Hayley Wickenheiser's resume, in case you forgot. Silver medal in Nagano, followed by 4 straight goals in Salt Lake, Torino, Vancouver, and Sochi. And to give you an idea of how long her playing career spanned, here are all her World Championship gold medals. 2012, 2007, 2004, 2000, 1999, 1997, and 1994. So for a decent chunk of you, zero exaggeration, Hayley Wickenheiser has been playing hockey for longer than you've been alive. And also, it's not quite true to suggest that Hayley Wickenheiser is brand new to the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. Actually, just a couple months ago, this past June, Wickenheiser was helping out at the Leafs rookie camp. And if she ends up coaching, she wouldn't be the Leafs' only coach from Saskatchewan, but you could say she was a good player. How's that? As John Mattis from The Score points out on Twitter, Wickenheiser and Needham join a small but growing group of women in full-time NHL hockey ops roles. Rachel Dory for the Devils, Kate Madigan for the Devils, and Alexandra Mendricki for the Minnesota Wild. And that's only a few of them. So that in itself is awesome. Hockey does need to expand in that regard. It certainly wouldn't kill hockey to expand its thinking. But let's get something clear. Kyle Dubas hired 3 people who he thinks can help the Toronto Maple Leafs organization because their resumes kick complete ass. Victor Carneiro is already plugged into the hockey scene in Ontario. Noel Needham is already plugged into the hockey scene in the Midwestern United States. Hayley Wickenheiser is already plugged into hockey in the Leafs organization. As a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, I just want to see the Leafs hire the best people. And today, I think they did. So that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. I always say click like if you really like this video, click subscribe if you really liked it, but for real, subscribe if you really liked it. Tell all your friends, and I'll see you when there's other August hockey news. Seriously, what?